Welcome everybody in the name of the German Archaeological Institute, the Istanbul branch. I welcome you all. And we are looking forward to a very interesting evening today, a lecture by Daniel Schwemmer, Dominic Kruger and Andreas Schaffner about Assyrians, Hittites and Romans in Boğazköy, Hattuša. And I welcome you. This is our first lecture in 2021. And we are still not really used, although we're using it all the time, to this format of Zoom conferences. But this is our first evening lecture in 2021. So welcome everybody. Our today's presenters are kind of all associated to our Boğazköy Hattuša project. And I will introduce you now to the speakers. And then afterwards we will have a discussion, and I just would like to announce that the discussion is only possible. So if you have questions, put them into the chat function, and after all three talks are finished, we will have a debate or discussion round where we will read out the kind of questions from the chat to the presenters. And I will try to keep a bit on track of the questions also on Facebook. Our IT staff members will forward the chat questions to us. Okay, so today we have these three presentations about Hattuša, different topics, and I will start to present our kind of colleague here from the Institute, Andreas Schaffner. He studied originally in Köln University, Near Eastern archaeology and prehistory and Orientalistic, and then he's continued later in Munich with also still Near Eastern archaeology, Assyriology, Turkology, and many, many more. And since 2005, he is a research lecturer here at the German Archaeological Institute in Istanbul, and since 2006, the head of the Hattuša project. And he is one of the probably most experienced persons when it comes down to Hattuša, Boğazköy. And I had last year the pleasure to get a tour when I became the second director of the institute here. So it's always a pleasure to have you here, Andreas. He's followed by Daniel Schwemmer, Professor Dr. Daniel Schwemmer from the University of Würzburg. He had studied originally ancient Oriental studies at Tübingen and Würzburg, where he also did in the year 2000 his PhD. And then he habilitated in Würzburg as well in 2005. Then he worked for a brief period of time in Heidelberg as well. And then he was between 2005 and 2011 professor at the SOAS in London for Assyriology and Hittitology. And since 2011, he is professor for ancient Oriental studies in Würzburg, where his main focus is on Akkadic, Hittitology, Near Eastern or ancient Oriental religious studies, magical practices, medicine, and rituals. And last but not least, he is also since 2011 the head of the Center for Hittite Research at the Academy of Science in Mainz. So welcome here for this lecture. And last but not least, we have also Dr. Dominic Kruger. She studied classical archaeology at the Humboldt University in Berlin, was between 2009 and 15 a research assistant at our department here in Istanbul for the editorial board, the Redaktion, and wrote her PhD about the settlement history of Kilikia. And since 2019, she is a staff member, research assistant in the DFG-funded Boğazköy project for the Roman, especially for the Roman periods. So welcome everybody to the evening, and I wish us a pleasant and interesting talk. And please, Andreas, start and present your lecture.
Yes, thank you very much, Moritz, for the kind introduction. I will share my screen now. I hope everybody can see. And yes, it's a pleasure to not only speak alone about Hattuša and always touching about topics I'm not really a specialist in, like the Romans or the textual evidences. So we have the pleasure to combine here these three aspects of the site. Therefore, I will focus on the early periods of the urban development at Hattuša. For those familiar with the historical periods, it is the period of the Assyrian trade colonies and the Old Hittite period. I want to show some new evidences and go a little bit into some explanations. The other periods, we also have finds from the other periods, but this will be another topic. We start with Boğazköy going or traveling into the central part of Anatolia, to the northeast of Central Anatolia, in a very dissected landscape with long snowy winters and hot dry summers. And I just collected here I picked up the collected data on harvests in the early 20th century, and from these studies and from Ottoman studies, it is clear that we are facing in this region every 15 to 20 years severe droughts, and so that leads to a complete breakdown of the economical circles. So the main question, or one of the main questions in the last years, was why and how a city, a large city, developed in this marginal region. Because at the very beginning, there were, and the DAI researched several of them, there were only small hamlets, not even villages, so to say, of a very few houses. And these were also not long-lived, so there's no tell development in this region. There are no these large Hög sites, and probably also a very egalitarian political organization, and a subsistence economy limit to the very settlement. Although on the map you might see it might look very densely populated, you have to keep in mind that until the late 3rd millennium BC, all these sites were very short-lived, maybe 100 years, 150 years, like the example of Çamlıbel Tarlası excavated under the umbrella of the DAI project between 2007 and 2010 by Ulf Schoop from Edinburgh University showed us. So the question is, how then this suddenly in the late 3rd millennium, or at the turn of the 3rd to the 2nd millennium, this huge city evolved, or how was it founded? As you might know, Boğazköy is one of the largest Bronze Age cities in the Near East. It is systematically researched since 1906 by first the Istanbul Museums and the Deutsche Orient Gesellschaft, and then since 1931 by an international team made up of Turkish, German, but all other nationalities under the umbrella of the German Archaeological Institute. Here, I just want to show you a rough picture of the very schematic, I admit, of the development of the city from the latest 3rd millennium to the late 2nd millennium. One could extend this to the Roman period, through the Iron Ages and the Galatian period, but this is another topic, as I said. But what has to be mentioned is that Boğazköy is one of the very few sites continuously settled in the 2nd millennium BC, because at the normal sites, at the usual sites, at the large Tel or Höyük sites, there's a break in the settlement shortly after the Karum period, the Assyrian trade colonies period, or at the very end of the 2nd millennium with the collapse of the Hittite Empire. But at Boğazköy, we can, in a diachronic approach, look at all these periods together. And this is one of the fascinating spectra of this particular site. So, as I said, the one question was how a large urban site was founded in this marginal region, and why? Because at the very beginning, when Boğazköy was founded, the understanding that this site is the Hittite capital city changed the whole picture of the ancient Near East, because until that time, people only thought that the large empires and large states, complex societies developed along the rivers of Euphrates, Tigris, or the Nile, or even if you go further to the east, along the Indus. But with Boğazköy, it became clear that also under certain conditions, something comparable could happen on the plateau. At Boğazköy, two mountain crossings are meeting, and this, in connection with abundance of water among these rocky outcrops you see on the picture, might be over the times, independent of any cultural coining, one of the core reasons for this site to be selected by humans to be settled. Keeping an eye on the Assyrian trade colonies, because we will also focus on it later, we now see by excavations at Kültepe especially, that the picture which is summarized on the map here is giving us only the second peak of a trade system between Anatolia and Mesopotamia, which already was well established in the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. And at least in the very early 2nd millennium, it is clear that we have three main sites at the outer parts of this system, and several sites with the yellow dots controlling particularly strategical important points. And one of those is Hattuša, among others, as you can see on the map. Why Hattuša was selected is not so clear, because from an easy eye, it is not so easy, not clear why the site is important. What can it offer to the trade system? I added here with a question mark, with a large question mark, salt, because not far away from Boğazköy, about 80 kilometers to the north, there are the largest rock salt mines of Turkey. They were probably used already in the ancient times, but since there's still ongoing modern industrial exploitation, there's no way to research them properly so far, or no one did research them properly so far. But this would be one of those goods which could be into the circle system, added to the circle system. And from Europe, we know, from Central Europe, Southeastern Europe, we know that salt can make an empire and can bring down empires or rich cultures. This last year in 2020, we were lucky to not only to extend excavations concerning the Karum period, that is what we did already in the previous years, but to find remains of something which is older than the Karum period. It is this dark red, very regular oriented building under the light red one. This building is only partly preserved and could only be partly excavated, but it's rather clear that these two pieces, or that these bits and pieces, belong together. In the northern part, there is a storage room. So it might be of the same kind of building, which we will see later. But interestingly, we also found, together with the debris of this building, the so-called intermediate ceramics. These intermediate ceramics is particular for the inner part of the Kızılırmak Valley band, and it belongs to the turn of the latest third and earliest second millennium BC. We are still waiting for carbon dates from this year's excavations, but already carbon dates from the last year from mixed contexts show that this building might have been erected already in the 20th or 19th century BC, and therefore we can say, together with the rest of these early findings, which were encountered in the 50s and 60s, that we are confronted with a very complex city, and probably here also with an official building. This building then was turned over, or was destroyed, and its place was taken by an extended settlement of the Karum period, of the Assyrian trade colonies period. The mahalle, or the quarter at the bottom of the plan, was excavated already in the 30s and the 50s, and the northern parts were excavated by us. We encountered a large royal storehouse, which contained more than 160 large pithoi, as you can see them here. They are very regular in shape, in volume, in weight, etc. So there we can clearly see we have a standardized economical procedures we are confronted with, and also we can expect social and technical aspects of pottery making, pottery production and use. These are all under study at the moment. But it is striking, this uniformity is very striking, and it sheds light on the pottery development from a totally different site. The use of the function of this building above or apart from being a storehouse is difficult to say. We found lot of seals and ceilings, and also several of these copper ingots, as you can see here, one as an example. So it has also, it's all about the economy, but we do not know how it was embedded into the rest of the settlement and the social structure at the moment. I hope we will find out in the next seasons. Why can we say it is a royal building? Because together with in the debris of the burnt building, we found a royal letter. Daniel will refer later to it, sent by the king of Hattuša, Piushti to a certain Hirmili of Harsana, and that also gives us a dating about the mid of the 18th century BC. So it is very difficult to say whether this destruction goes together with Anita or not. I will return to this later. Here you can see the buildings a little bit more in a little bit more detail. This goes together with research on earlier excavated Karum period remains. We have this large storage building at Ambarlı Kaya. The residential area in the northern part of the lower city I already mentioned, and in the southern part of the lower city we excavated a small but very complex and very interesting sequence from the Karum period to the old Hittite period. And getting all these things together with especially carbon datings, it is clear, or it already was clear from these, that there's probably no hiatus between the two political defined periods, the Karum period and the Hittite one. And this, with this preliminary result, when we started excavating, we were very happy to see that in the northern part of the lower city, above or on top of this large burned building of the Karum period, and immediately above it, we have evidence of an intermediate layer between the old Assyrian buildings and the completely reshaping of this area in the old Hittite period. And as you can see on the picture on the top right, the new floors and paved areas were built virtually into the pithoi. So it is an immediate transition. We have about 50 centimeters of continuous use. So it's a considerable time which was settled in this area. So the previously assumed hiatus, which was assumed on the so-called Anita text, probably is at least archaeologically disproved. We now may think that at Hattuša there was a settlement, there was settling activities going on. It was a living city or a living settlement which Hattušili the first took over, if we believe the foundation myth of the Hittites, which are resembling or which are recalling this in this Anita text. When we look a little bit on the more broader picture and compare the Karum period on the left with the Old Hittite period in the middle, it becomes clear that there is a large, about 200 meters wide and 400 meters long area between the two, which was not settled in the early second millennium. And we can say it was not settled because several excavations, including ours, were brought down on virgin soil without finding anything of the Karum period. But it is interesting that exactly into this open space in the Old Hittite periods, several monumental buildings were put, such as a monumental building at the south of Kesikaya. Daniel will later refer to some text finds from this area, but also the large temple, the so-called Südareal, are standing in this area, which was part of the larger city of the Old Hittite period, which was put together with the so-called postern wall. And also part of it is the granary excavated by Jürgen Seer, and the postern wall here in the picture of our restoration work. So we can see that at the beginning of the Old Hittite period, a complete refurbishment or complete reshaping of the city took place and bringing it away from a normal Anatolian small capital of a principality to a capital of a greater kingdom. As I said, the large temple, which you all are probably familiar with it, stands exactly in this open space. After 2014, we excavated also in it a little bit. We did a lot of still continuing restoration work. And as part of this, we also start a publication process concerning the magnificent architecture, which is not published so far. And what becomes clear from this is that the temple must be dated, or can be dated, should be dated much earlier than previously thought. Here on this graph, I still wrote late 16th century. You might see that, or in the top you can see that I changed this idea already to the 17th and 16th century, because there are several architectural details connecting it to radiocarbon dated areas of the city, and these are so unique that I think they are built in the same period, exactly in the beginning of the Old Hittite times. What became clear is, on the first view, it might look that it's only details changed, but there are some considerable details. I just want to pinpoint that we now can identify with some clarity 7 different groups of holy rooms within the temple. And also there are changes in the architectural design or structure of the storerooms and the interpretation, especially of accesses, etc., and routes through the temple. I hope that we will be able to present this in the near future. But keep in mind that the temple is, as I said, well established in the 16th century, and that we also, according to this, that we have to change about our ideas about the city. And that's the same time when also on the Boğazköy, a new palace architecture was established, of which we still do not have a lot. But what we can see is also compared to sites like İnandıktepe or the later phases at Boğazköy, that it is a structure grouping buildings around large courtyards and separating them by elevation on different terraces. This is all something which we are familiar with, especially from the 14th and 13th century, but this starts already in this period. And so we can see that the Hittites came, or the Hittite kingdom at the very first beginning started to build indigenous locally developed forms as well in religious architecture, as well as in state state architecture, royal architecture. And this is very important for the idea and ideological and identity behind this state structure. From the analysis of the Delta 13 isotopes gained from many radiocarbon measurements from Boğazköy, we now can say that this development benefited from a considerably better or considerably more humid climate in the first half of the second millennium. This is also established by other similar research and goes parallel with what we see from the Greenland ice core reference curves. Let's return shortly to the northern part of the lower city, where on top of the karum period, we see a complete also rechanging and refurbishing of this part of the city. A huge building built up in several steps, probably three main phases we can separate from each other. At least from the second phase onwards, it is connected with the so-called Abschnittsmauer. We have, although it is very badly destroyed and very badly preserved, and the reasons you will see later, we have very spectacular fragments of finds, like these relief decorated vases, the carinated vases. So we are well in the Old Hittite period, and those are maybe already known drinking vessels which were found in the debris related to this building. One in the shape of a bull's head, one in the shape of a goat's head, and from my point of view, the most spectacular one in the shape of a fist, made of a highly polished grayish clay, which is very rare in Hattuša at all. Only found so far in the Old Hittite periods, and clearly an imitation of metal. And the only parallel find is that at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, which was illegally transferred out of Turkey. So we can now say that these such drinking vessels really were used. And the question is in which context they were used. The building they were connected to, or might have been somehow related to the cupbearers of the great king, because Urs Soysal showed in a detailed study of the texts that there are some topographical hints of the location of the building in relation to the great temple that might indicate such a, may allow such a hypothesis. I'm very careful about this judgment, but I just want to quote it here. At the southern edge of this part of the city, close to the entrance gate, you see these on the plan, these yellowish parts. There's a large pavement, paved area, so we can see that there's a large open space. But at the northern edge of this this open space, we found a very, not a very big building, but an interesting building with very interesting results. From the plan, it is highlighted in yellow, and you can see how the walls are turning and twisted like a snake a little bit. And this might, oops, sorry, and within this building also we found inventar. And this might not be so astonishing to many archaeologists, but in Boğazköy to find the complete inventory of a building is very exceptional, and we rarely have any finds in situ. So we were very happy, and that also already brought in mind that this building must have been destroyed together with the whole area by a very sudden event. And that a sudden event would also explain why we're confronted with 50 centimeters debris of stones in this area, which we had to dug through. And parallel to our work, we are cooperating with Ökmen Sümer and Mahmut Rahor, two geologists from 9 Eylül University at Izmir, and they can clearly show that Boğazköy is just right in the middle of several, probably two major fault lines of the so-called Sungulu extension of the North Anatolian fault line, or a major fault line. And when I started in Boğazköy, I was always interested or asking myself why we see these cracks in the architecture and the huge blocks of the Great Temple, as you can see them at the bottom right. And these cracks are in blocks which were not moved by people. They are still in situ. They are still there where they were placed 3,700 years ago. And even with the naked eye, it's clear that they are all more or less in the same direction. And together with the study of Ökmen and Mahmut, it is clear that this building once was struck by a very severe earthquake, which which caused these cracks. So it is, from my opinion, rather convincing to think that that the whole area to the north also was destroyed by an earthquake in the earliest 14th century BC. But what is clear is that from this large building complex, as well as from the house with the inventory, there's no material dating to the empire or to the later empire period as we know it from the upper city. So as a result of this, we will have to change our idea of this here still very linearly shown development of the city. I already started to work about this. There are papers in Torino. There's a paper published in Torino where I try to gather the evidence for the upper city, indicating that we have a change between settled areas and areas which are in ruins. And I think that this model has to be extended to the whole period of use of the site and the whole site. But this still needs more detailed and accurate dating, and we are still on the track to do this. So this gave us a short impression of what we are doing concerning the Assyrians, the Assyrian traders especially, and the Hittites. And now I hand over to Daniel Schwemer, who will now talk about some of the most recent text finds. Thank you very much for your attention. So Daniel, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. I hope you can all hear me well, and you can also see now the presentation here.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, good. Well, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. Boğazköy, the Hittite capital Boğazköy Hattuša, is of course famous, not least for the extensive finds of cuneiform texts that have come to light in various areas of the site. The vast majority of the nearly 29,000 cuneiform tablets and fragments was discovered in the area of the Great Temple, in the so-called house on the slope, on Büyükale, in various parts of the Hittite palace complex, and to a lesser extent in the temple quarter of the upper city. The large total number of cuneiform text finds from the Hittite capital makes it easy to forget that the days when hundreds or even thousands of texts were found in the course of one campaign lie in the distant past. Some 11,000 tablets and fragments were dug up during the very first excavation periods in 1905 to 7 and 1911 to 12. And further excavation periods with prolific text finds include the 1930s and the 1960s. If one visualizes the quantity of annual text finds in a column, it becomes immediately apparent that the recent campaigns compared to the early work, like the short span of human history, to earlier ages on a geological timeline of our planet. Since 2012, when I was entrusted with the field epigraphy at Boğazköy, archaeological investigations were conducted mainly in the lower city, in particular in the area of Kesikaya and in the northern lower city. And Andreas has already shown you some of his work in these areas. Some work was also carried out in the Great Temple, as you've already heard, and on Büyükale along the northwestern fortification wall. A steady trickle of cuneiform fragments has accumulated to a total of 89 text finds over the past 8 campaigns. Unfortunately, none of these fragments come from a clearly identifiable archival context. Today, I will discuss with you only 3 of these fragments, one found near Kesikaya, one from the excavations in the northern lower city, and one fragment that has come to light on Büyükale. They include one Akkadian text from the period of the Old Assyrian merchants in the 18th century BCE, one Akkadian scholarly text originally kept in one of the libraries of Hittite Empire period Hattuša, and one judicial Hittite text from the second half of the 13th century BCE. We start with Bow 2018-24, published as KBO 7181. The fragment was found in the northern lower city in the burned remains of a storage building from the Old Assyrian period that you have already seen, and which is shown on this plan in red, and is also easily recognizable on the photos by the large number of storage vessels still in situ. The fragment represents the upper half of a single column cuneiform tablet inscribed in the cuneiform script that is characteristic of the Old Assyrian period and quite distinct from the later Hittite cuneiform script. Like all Old Assyrian texts from Boğazköy, the tablet dates to the 18th century and is contemporary to the later period of Assyrian activity in Kültepe Kanesh, the main Assyrian colony in Central Anatolia. The opening lines show the text to be a letter. It is, however, not a letter written by an Assyrian trader, as they are attested in great number, but a message from the local Anatolian ruler of Boğazköy Hattuša to another Anatolian ruler. This type of text is extremely rare, and from the many thousands of old Assyrian tablets found at Kültepe Kanesh, only one single other intra-Anatolian royal letter can be named. As far as preserved, we can translate the letter as follows, and importantly, uncertainties in the translation are indicated by italics. Thus Viushti, prince of Hattuša, to maybe Hermeli, king of Khasanam, speak. Guard yourself, wait for maybe Uskya. How are you to act? I fear that he is deceiving you in the matter of the Ashium iron. You must not accept it. Otherwise you yourself will fall. Accept my Ashium iron, then you will be truly my son. His Ashium iron or anything else of his you must not accept. Should he speak thus to you, you are truly a king, then he's lying to you. And unfortunately, at this point, the obverse breaks and the much less well-preserved reverse reads, broken of my word, he's lifting the cup. Whether my messengers came to you or not, your messenger has come here indeed. Possibly you are worried on his account. Your messenger came from the citizens of the city of Shalatiwara to Ninisha, broken. He will speak thus, shall die, he must not, and then the text breaks entirely. The letter reflects the political landscape of Middle Bronze Age Central Anatolia very well. The Assyrian traders encountered a region that was very much a patchwork of small and middle-sized principalities. The Anatolian princes compete with each other, alliances shift, and allegiances are unstable. As attested in many texts from that period, iron, Assyrian ashium, was a highly valued and prestigious commodity. There are three texts that shed further light on the persons and places attested in our letter. First, the so-called Anita text, a Hittite historical report, originally probably a royal inscription of Anita, Prince of Kanesh. Second, the Anunhilby Letter, a message sent by Anunhilby of Mama to Warshama, Prince of Kanesh, a contemporary of Anita's father, Petrana. And third, the Hurmeli Letter, a message from the merchants of Ashur to Hurmeli, Prince of Kharsamna. The Anita text reports that at the time of Anita, the Prince of Hattuša was a certain Piushti, certainly the same man as Wiushti, the sender of our letter. Piushti is said to have attacked Kanesh twice and seems to have been the ruler of Hattuša at the time of its destructions by Anita in about 1730 BCE. The newly found letter provides the first documentary evidence from Piushti of Hattuša himself, and the historical context of its contents is probably the conflict between Kanesh and Hattuša. The Anunhilby Letter, which dates a generation earlier than Piushti and Anita, shows that the Anatolian city of Kharsamna, probably identical with the Kharsanam in our letter, became an important political player in the 18th century. Further evidence for this development comes from a letter addressed to a King Hurmeli of Kharsamna. This letter, which dates in the mid-1770s, shows that the king of Kharsamna waged war on the upper Euphrates. Texts from Mari on the middle Euphrates attest trade ties between Kharsamna and King Zimri-Lim of Mari. Possibly the name of the king of Kharsamna, who is the addressee of our letter, is to be restored as Hurmeli. But in view of the chronological distance of about 45 years between Piushti of Hattuša and Hurmeli of Kharsamna, the Hurmeli of our letter, if correctly restored, is unfortunately unlikely to be the same man as the ruler of Kharsamna in the Hurmeli letter. The second text I would like to present to you is Bo 2013-1, published as KBO 6241. It was found in the rubble under first millennium walls south of Kesikaya, in the wider context of a monumental Hittite structure adjoining the rock of Kesikaya with its eponymous crevice. While made of clay, Bo 2013-1 is not a normal cuneiform tablet, but a solid tetrahedron with a height of 5.5 centimeters and a base of 11 centimeters. Cuneiform inscriptions are found on all three rising sides of the tetrahedron, as well as on the surrounding flat surface, which also shows a deep incision. At closer inspection, the object reveals itself to be the fragment of a clay model of a sheep liver, as they were commonly used by divination experts across the ancient Near East. No fewer than 58 clay liver models had already been found in Hattuša before 2013. They served as reference tools for extispicy, the inspection of the liver and other inner organs of the sheep for obtaining an oracle. Most of the models are inscribed with Akkadian omen text passages. Some have Hittite translations. The present fragment is inscribed in Akkadian and represents the so-called finger of the liver, in modern terminology, the caudate lobe. What is unusual about the 2013 fragment is its size. Whereas the usual transversal width of the liver models is about 9 to 12 centimeters, the reconstructed transversal width of the liver model to which the present fragment belonged must have been about 30 centimeters, which is about life size for a 1-year-old sheep. The caudate lobe, or in Akkadian, the finger, which is quite a prominent and easily recognizable part of the sheep's liver, was represented by a little clay pyramid in the bottom left corner of the liver model. Usually this pyramid is much too small to bear its own inscriptions. Because of its size, the present fragment gave room to more detailed inscriptions relating to the finger than is usually the case, providing us with new information on the technical terminology associated with this part of the liver. It is now clear that the finger had its own right-left orientation, which differed from that of the liver as a whole. Inscription A reads, "If on the width of the right side of the finger there is some kind of mark, Nergal will devour in my land." Thus, the inscription identifies the side pointing away from the lower edge of the liver as the right side. In the same way, inscription B shows that the opposite side pointing to the edge of the liver was considered the left side. Both inscriptions show that right and left side together were known as the width of the finger of the liver. Other texts show that the third, slightly concave side was called the middle side. The inscription on this side of our fragment refers to the tip of the finger. Finally, inscriptions F and G give us the name of the surrounding area as the plain and refer to the end of the deep incision as the tip of the canal. The language of the inscriptions is Akkadian. The cuneiform script on the model is not that commonly employed by Hittite scribes. The liver model is therefore likely either to have been imported to Hattuša from abroad or to have been produced by a foreign divination expert at the Hittite royal court. This knowledge transfer in antiquity, the adoption of Mesopotamian oracle techniques and their terminology in Hittite Anatolia has left its traces in the written record from the Hittite archives, and sometimes a cuneiform fragment from distant Hattuša provides new information on cultural techniques that originated thousands of miles away in Babylonia, today's southern Iraq. My third and final text, or I should say fragment, is a small fragment from the upper right corner of what was probably a 2-column cuneiform tablet. Bohr 2018-25, published as KBO 7143, was found in the course of recent work on the northwestern fortification wall of the royal palace complex on Boğazköy. It forms part of a group of fragments that were found behind the monumental wall of Tower 7 and probably originally belonged to a collection of tablets kept in Building E, which is located just above that section of the fortification wall. In total, 45 fragments were found in this area, most of them comparatively small. They include historical and administrative texts, royal letters and prayers, myths and magic rituals, as well as oracle reports and omen texts. Also fragments in foreign languages, Hurrian, Akkadian, and Sumerian are found among this group. It reflects the inventory of a typical royal tablet collection in Boğazköy. Bohr 2018-25, of which you see here a photo on the slide, was part of a tablet that recorded statements made within the framework of a judicial investigation whose purpose, proceedings, and outcome are unfortunately largely unknown. Most of the text is too fragmentary for translation, but the passage in lines 5 to 15 of the obverse is at least in part comprehensible. And I will say when it's broken, and as you'll see, much is broken here in this text. We did from the land of Kumani. Ekutsiti, though, came back and on the estate. We questioned. He spoke thus, do not proclaim, do not. I said, why? He said, Kheshni and Tatamaru. Demand for an offspring of the majesty of the first rank. They took the oath after Khalpashulupi. To me, though, they were, and it was even more favorable for me, proclaim my name. Due to its fragmentary state, much of this text passage is unclear. Who is speaking? Which quotation ends where? And how is one quotation embedded in the other? It is clear, though, that a contested royal succession is a central topic of the statement, and that individuals called Kheshni and Tatamaru are involved in the matter. Overall, the individuals mentioned in the fragment, not all of them mentioned in the passage that I just read to you, the individuals mentioned in the fragment constitute an interesting group of prominent courtiers of the second half of the 13th century. There's Kheshni, a well-known prince, son of Hattušili III and brother or half-brother of Hattušili III's son and successor Tudhaliya IV, whom you see here on the famous relief from Yazil Kaya. Another brother or half-brother of Tudhaliya IV mentioned on the fragment is Armatsiti. Tatamaru too is a prince, though from another line of the Hittite royal dynasty, and Khalpashulupi is a brother of Hattušili III and uncle of Tudhaliya IV. Finally, Pichashamuba, mentioned on the reverse of the fragment, is a high-ranking official serving under Hattušili III. This prosopographical evidence puts the fragment firmly in the late reign of Hattušili III, and the contested succession is therefore probably Tudhaliya IV's accession to the throne. Tudhaliya IV's accession and early reign are an intriguing period of Hittite history that is still not well understood. There are several sources that suggest that the transition from Hattušili III to Tudhaliya IV did not go entirely smoothly. A fragmentary text called the Conspiracy of Kheshni seems to suggest that the latter, Kheshni, plotted a coup against his brother and king. Oracle reports concerning the enthronement of Tudhaliya IV attest to problems and delays, and also seem to refer to at least the danger of a coup. The oaths that Tudhaliya IV imposed on his princes and courtiers seem to be motivated by a rather acute concern about the loyalty of the empire's grandees to their king. Moreover, the consequences of the split in the royal dynasty caused by Hattušili III's usurpation of the throne continued well into the reign of Tudhaliya IV, as is demonstrated by the treaty between Tudhaliya and his cousin Kuruntia of Tahuntasha on the famous bronze tablet, and many, many other related texts from that period. The judicial proceedings attested on our small fragment belong into this historical context, and while the fragment provides unfortunately very little detailed information on the matter at hand, it confirms the impression of a tense and at times precarious state of affairs in the Hittite royal family and for the Hittite state in the 1230s. The days in which large tablets and many hundreds of cuneiform fragments were found in the course of single campaigns at Boğazköy Hattuša will probably not return, but I hope to have shown you that the Hittite capital is by no means an exhausted site for Hittitology and cuneiform studies. Even small fragments, I would argue, can provide important insights and add their information to the big puzzle of broken and patchy sources from which we attempt to reconstruct the history and culture of Hattuša, of the Hittites, and of ancient West Asia, the ancient Near East, more generally. Thank you very much, and I stop my presentation and hand the word back to Andreas or Dominic.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. And I smoothly hand over to Dominic to start on a completely different period.
Yeah, so you can see my presentation, I hope. Let's see.
Yes.
And also
yes.
the mouse.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's skip some 100 years and go into the Roman Imperial period. Settled by Celtic tribes since the 3rd century BC, Galatia was left to Rome by its last ruler Amyntas in 25 BC. It became an imperial province with Ankara as its capital and ever-changing borders. The long-standing warlike culture of its inhabitants and its central location within Asia Minor made Galatia an important place of recruitment for Rome's legions and an equally important military staging area. Galatia therefore found itself in an exceptional political and socio-economic situation during the late 1st century BC and the 1st century AD, which is mirrored in the local architecture. Several surveys in Hattuša's wider region have discovered proof of the existence of several settlements dating to the Roman imperial period. Noteworthy is a clustering of villages and farmsteads around the reconstructed Roman road, here in yellow, that connected Tavium with the north and passed approximately 5 kilometers west of Boğazköy, the modern Boğazköy. Thanks to the discovery of several milestones along the course of the road, the earliest from the reign of Nerva, it can at least be partly dated to the 1st century AD. Only the road's general course is known and details are still unclear. The motivation for undertaking such an extensive infrastructure project will have been based on furthering Roman military and economic interests. The construction work itself most likely fell, as was common, to the Roman soldiers based in the province. Some sections of the road around Boğazköy were secured and controlled by so-called way stations, which, based on their construction at strategic locations, are seen as small garrisons placed directly by the roadside. None have been explored in detail, but an analysis of the pottery found during surveys confirms that they were constructed at the same time as the road they overlooked. Clear evidence of the presence of Roman troops in these structures has, however, only been found in those located on the western slope of the Tilkili Tepe in form of a Roman legionnaire's helmet found in their vicinity. These finds support the theory of the existence of a more permanent Roman presence, which was established as early as the 1st decades following the incorporation of the region into the empire. The question of where these soldiers were stationed remains unanswered. Since 2014, extensive excavations have been taking place in the north and lower city of Hattuša, the ancient capital of the Hittite Empire. The results of geophysical surveys commissioned some years prior, as well as the remains of a wall of opus cementitium visible on the surface, indicated that, besides the Hittite remains, Roman structures might be found in the area of the so-called Miraplicaia. A large rock with a prominent niche carved into its surface, which was thought to be a part of a Byzantine chapel. In the first year, the excavations at Miraplicaia revealed the first walls of an extensive complex of Roman buildings, marked on the map in blue, which seems to be connected to the already known Hellenistic Roman necropolis in yellow. This necropolis surrounds the Great Temple, containing over 200 graves, dating from the 3rd century BC up to the 4th century AD, and was mainly excavated during the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Even today, each year's excavations reveal more graves, which are found even in the immediate vicinity of the Roman imperial structures. Also, since 2014, 3 major building complexes have been found. 1, parts of military fortifications, here marked in blue. 2nd, a large pool with an adjoining richly decorated banquet hall in green. and third, a villa with bath in red. This picture shows the current state of the excavations on the right, with the northern area of the camp to the northwest, the pool to the southeast, and the adjoining villa to the west. The plan on the left shows the various construction phases which we have been able to identify so far. You can also see that both buildings incorporated, at least to some extent, parts of the much older and at least still somewhat visible Hittite walls in this area, here shown in a light gray. Of these three complexes, the fortifications are the oldest structures and may also answer the question asked above, namely, just where the Roman soldiers stationed in the area had their headquarters. Already in 2014, two walls, you can see them here on the map, were more closely investigated, whose course could still partly be traced above ground. They were parallel to each other with a southwestern-northeastern orientation and are mostly composed of Hittite building elements in secondary use. As became quickly clear, the ashlars did not form two separate walls, but were in fact the outer faces of a single, about 6-meter wide wall. On the basis of the still visible walls, excavated sections, geophysical surveys, and topographical indicators, this wall can be traced over at least 400 meters. I tried to put them into it here in a blue line, here on the geophysical data map, and here also in the area view. The wall forms two roughly right angles and continues in the direction of the modern village, where we lose the trail. Because of the dimensions of this fortification, its regular structure, and the rectangular internal spacing, we propose the interpretation of the structure as a Roman military camp. In order to test this theory, we began excavating at several key locations. We unearthed the corner of the fortification, two internal rooms, and possibly the remains of a gate. With only two rooms known, we can offer little information in regards to their use or the shape of layout or the inner structures. For now, the northeastern corner and the area by the modern road are far more promising. Both the fortifications and the hypothetical gate are connected with the northern Hittite fortifications and differ markedly from the above described 6-meter wide wall in regards to their design and building technique. The northeastern corner seems to have been taken up by a tower, which was later rebuilt and modified. The area next to the modern road could have housed a gate, as it's suggested by a number of finds. Especially noteworthy is the inner face of the wall, which consists of reused Hittite ashlars and can be traced over a length of 20 meters, and a large room containing a significant number of architectural elements and installation. You can here see the 20-meter wide wall, and this is the room I was talking about. While only a relatively small number of finds has been made until now, these are, as well as a result of radiocarbon dating, date the fortifications in general to the 1st century AD, probably to its first half. It remains unclear why a Roman military structure, or in this case, maybe a military camp, would have been constructed here in Boğazköy during the early imperial period. The building project might have been connected to the incorporation of the region into the Roman Empire and the wider goal of pacifying the new province. The site's strategic position is undeniable. The camp at Boğazköy would have been both on site and in reach of two mountain passes to the north and the aforementioned road leading northeast, and one of its functions would surely have been secure in safeguarding both. Its location on a hillside and therefore slightly higher up than the terrain to the north must have offered sentinels a wide-ranging view of the surrounding area. The camp could also have functioned as a supply post, with materials and provisions being distributed via the nearby road. Since we lack historical sources concerning the region at the time, it is still unknown which and how many troops were stationed at the military structure. Its function should be viewed in light of the general situation the Romans faced in Central Anatolia at the beginning of their reign. Especially for the early period of Roman rule, when the province was still not entirely pacified and external enemies were not far, the existence of a Roman military camp close to a road of the imperial period and in the wider vicinity of an important crossroads can come as no particular surprise and would fit nicely into the historical context of 1st century AD Galatia. In the 2nd century AD, the military camp had already been abandoned and partly covered with other buildings. New structures, this time in opus cementitium, were constructed on top of the fortifications or in their immediate vicinity. Why exactly the camp was decommissioned is, again due to our lack of written sources, completely unclear, leaving us only to suppose that neither the camp nor its soldiers were of any continual importance to the tactical and strategic situation of the region. Now, in seemingly more peaceful times, the focus shifted to the construction of the civilian living spaces. So this is here again the Roman fortification wall, and this is one of the complexes I was talking about, and that's the other one here. In the southeastern area, these two large complexes were erected with opus cementitium. The complex west of the rock outcrop of Novaplikaya consists of a large pool measuring about 18 by 55 meters, which was partly incorporated into Hittite structures. In front of the niche, carved into the rock face, there's a complex system of smaller pools, water channels, and walls bit up to and partly into the large pool. On the picture on the right, you can see a possibly reconstruction whose most unusual element is a roofed area on the right-hand side of the niche. In this area, roof tiles, double capitals, and fragments of painted wall plaster have been found. One of the painted panels with a colorful floral motif has already been reconstructed. This speaks for the reconstruction of the area as a kind of banquet hall, which was separated from the pool by a portico with Doric columns. The exact function of these installations at Novaplikaya is still unclear, and the lack of contemporary comparisons makes it difficult to specify their purpose. But the lack of objects associated with the practice of any kind of known code allows the interpretation as a purely recreational and/or representative structure. These buildings are not the only structures of this kind found in the sector. The area excavated in the vicinity of the modern road also exhibits walls made of opus cementitium, column bases, and fragments of painted wall plaster. Both the construction techniques and the decoration of this structure thus brings the so-called banquet hall to mind. In the northwestern corner of the large pool, we found another portico and a set of steps which led up to another building complex. The column bases of this portico are in fact repurposed capitals, which seem to have been scrapped due to defects of floors, as can, for example, be seen on the picture on the bottom right. One must presume that these capitals were the work of a local artisan lacking the experience of a more skilled craftsman. The complex situated west of the pool and its associated structures can, at least at the moment, be viewed as a Roman villa rustica, even though other interpretations are not unthinkable. As can be seen on the eastern part of the area photograph, the white defensive wall with its outer facings of Hittite ashlars is clearly visible and was incorporated into the complex. The central and northern rooms form part of a large bathing facility. They consist of a number of absidal rooms, some of which were heated via epochs systems, while others are in fact remains of bathing pools. Special mention deserves a mosaic floor roughly 6 by 6 meters in size, composed of geometric patterns of colored bands and diamond shapes, surrounding a central panel showing red, black, and blue hexagons. The southeastern wall of the large absidal room in the north, see on the lower left corner, and another wall west of it was built in the opus reticulatum technique, the use of which is extremely rare in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. To be noted is also the widespread use of marble decorations, a material which is not native to the region and must therefore have been imported. Lying on top of the mosaic, we also found a capital, one of whose sides bears great resemblance to a capital of the Tuscan order. If this comparison was intended, however, it was once again executed quite poorly. These architectural features appear to be a deliberate attempt by the builders to copy contemporary Roman imperial architectural trends. While they were still largely unknown in Galatia at the time, most of them can be found not only in Rome, but also in various variants and forms in the cities of the Roman East. The mediocre, at times even deficient workmanship, however, speaks in our case for local craftsmen who were still unpracticed in recreating these architectural forms and building techniques. Where exactly these artisans and the comparatively large workforce necessary for these constructions lived and who paid their wages can as of now only be speculated. In the case of the erection and maintenance of the military camp, the official Imperial Roman administration may have played a greater role. The military structures were, after all, directly connected to the incorporation of Galatia into the Roman Empire, and the site was possibly of additional importance as a supply base and a garrison to guard the road in nearby mountain passes. In contrast, the construction of a richly furnished villa more likely stemmed from the building efforts of a wealthy local resident, or perhaps a Roman administrator. For now, the question of the identity and function of the villa's owner must remain unanswered. Its sheer size, elaborate layout, and rich decor, as well as the current lack of specific rooms that one would expect to find in a Roman villa, would also support the interpretation of the complex as a Roman public bath. Since we still have not found any contemporary residential buildings in the vicinity, one would have to ask for whom this bath was intended. Several possible explanations come to mind. Among these, the most likely would seem to be that either the bath was built for and by the inhabitants of a yet to be discovered nearby settlement, or that it was created and used in a kind of very unusual joint venture by the inhabitants of the surrounding area. Whoever the structure's intended clients may have been, its construction made the installation and maintenance of a constant water supply a necessity. A substantial number of water channels, taking the form of simple stone channels set without the aid of mortar, mostly in the area of the military structures, channels coated with hydraulic mortar and clay pipes, have indeed been found in the northern Lower Town in recent years, bringing water to the site from the southeast. The three complexes, the presumed military camp, the villa, and the east-west of Mirablicaia, were rebuilt and reconstructed more than once and were in use until the 4th century AD. On top of the fortifications of the 1st century AD, walls of Opus Cementitium were constructed in the 2nd century AD, comprising several small rooms, possibly storage spaces. On top left in red. This, as well as the simultaneous reconstruction and integration of the camp wall into the villa complex, clearly shows a fundamental change in the function and utilization of the military structures. Some other alterations were probably undertaken only a few decades after the construction of the villa and the large pool. To cite a few examples. Walls of Opus Cementitium set up against the older Opus Reticulatum walls in some areas, see below in the center. There also were walls constructed of quarry stones built on top of the mosaic floor, which both covered the expansive floor and fundamentally changed the use and layout of the room. Similar developments can be found in the northeastern corner of the camp, where new walls were inserted, forming new rooms. The many phases of reconstruction can perhaps be explained by local forces and elites who rose in prominence and began to transform the layout of the buildings according to their own needs and preferences, once the central power's influence or interest in Boğazköy began to wane. In this context, the simple parallel and interconnected walls made of quarry stones in the western area of the baths are also noteworthy. See on the below right. They form part of a relatively large and long, rectangular, possibly three-eyed structure, which at first glance bears some resemblance to an agricultural, commercial, or storage building. The coins found in the urban area of the ancient city, which were minted in various localities between Rome and Antioch on the Orontes, speak for a lively and frequent exchange between Boğazköy and the provinces of the Roman Empire. This fits the small number of pottery sherds that were found, among which small imported bowls appear most frequently. The pottery and brick stamps and stonemasons mark, here on the left, that have been found point to various workshops. They have not been located yet, however, thus making both local productions and imports possible. Noteworthy are also the many glass fragments that came to light, especially in the western sector of the villa. Among these are fragments of blue, green, white, and transparent glass, which belong to common as well as prismatic bottles, root vessels, and cups. The raw materials necessary for the production were imported and processed on site. As a surprise came the discovery of several fragments of window glass, see on below right, which is the first time that this type of glass has been found in Galatia. When and why the Roman structures described here were abandoned remains an open question. There are, however, some indications of a major destructive event which may have damaged or destroyed the building complexes and led to the subsequent abandonment. Finally, whether their former inhabitants and occupants remained in the vicinity or gave up the area entirely remains a mystery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and the other two as well, kind of lecturers we have. And I would open the panel for questions, and please put your questions into the chat so we can forward it to the three to answer it in this kind of place. So there's a question by Robert Langer, kind of for Andreas. What is the archaeological definition of a holy room?
The definition of a holy room is, as we could also say, call it cella or aditon. It is the room which is dedicated to a certain god, which we do not know in this example. And around this particular room, there are several others grouped, sometimes in a very definite way. In these early or in the early Hittite architecture, they are decorated with small pilasters on the inside or outside of the room, so the walls have some kind of small niches or niche-like structure. This is something which was copied from the Mesopotamian religious architecture, but occurs in Hittite contexts only with this example of the great temple in Boğazköy.
Thank you. I'm stolen it. So then there's another question. I think this might be to Daniel. I'm not sure, but there's a question. Does any Hittite king talk about Anita in the studied texts? This is a question coming from the Facebook chat.
Does any king talk about Anita in that text? No.
Yeah, or in the studied texts. I think it's a general question.
Yeah. No, in this letter, the Old Assyrian letter that was found in 2018, there's only the sender of the letter is mentioned, Viushti or Piushti, and the connection between this Piushti and Anita is made by the so-called Anita text, which is a later Hittite text with a historical report that may go back itself to a real inscription of Anita of Karnesh, but that is not entirely certain. And this Hittite text that is written from the perspective of Anita mentions Piushti as the ruler of Hattuša at the time of the conflict between Anita and Hattuša, and that is the connection between the two. And in the recently found texts, unfortunately, Anita is not mentioned. It would, of course, be nice, and I had always hoped that we find a few more royal letters in that storage building, but unfortunately, so far, there is nothing on that.
There's another question for you, kind of, Daniel. Are there in the textual evidence of Old Assyrian period any hints or elements to distinguish ethno-linguistically the population of the various Anatolian communities in contact with Assyrian merchants, e.g. the Hittites, Luvians, Hattians?
Yeah, there are. There are personal names of individuals who bear not Assyrian personal names, but Anatolian personal names, and colleagues who study the linguistics of the ancient Anatolian languages have been able to show that these names reflect already Luvian and Hittite speaking in that area of Central Anatolia at that time. In addition to that, in the Old Assyrian texts, for which I'm not a specialist, I must say, but there are loan words from Anatolian languages of Central Anatolia in the Assyrian texts. A related question is, of course, which language did Piushti and Anita speak with each other, if they spoke with each other? Probably not Assyrian, but an ancient Anatolian language, which one is difficult to say with certainty. You can speculate, of course, but it is now significant that we have three letters, the three letters that I mentioned, the Piushti letter, the Anunhilby letter, and also the letter to Humli, where we see that the local Anatolian princes communicate with the Assyrians, but also with each other in Assyrian and in Old Assyrian cuneiform script. So they used the language of the traders that were present in Central Anatolia and their writing technology, their cuneiform script, also for intra-Anatolian communications. And we will have to see over the coming years how much more evidence for this we can gather. And if we had many, many more letters like the Piushti letter and the Anunhilby letter, then we probably would be able to see slowly the languages that these people actually spoke beneath the written Assyrian. But so far that is actually very difficult to tell because the evidence is so slim.
That's interesting. So there's the question to Dominic by Felix Pearson. Do you have any clues about the potential owners of the villa? Are there any hints of an elite in the local epigraphic records?
No, the problem is that we don't have any epigraphic records. So we actually don't know who lived there and who did all the stuff. We can only just tell that I guess it has to be somebody with a lot of money. So to build such a big building, or a group of people who collect enough money to build something like that. So unfortunately, it's really the problem that we don't have any written sources at all.
What a shame.
Yeah.
I think let me check. There's another question also to Daniel again. So we're kind of, it's about the liver model in a sense, kind of, so it's quite interesting. So did you check in with a biologist whether a dark color of the plane of the liver actually indicates a sickness in the animals or even zoonotic diseases, and therefore might cause a plague amongst the army, because there was something with plague in the army mentioned in the text?
Yeah. The main sources for our understanding of the interpretation of the sheep's liver in the course of extispicy in this oracle procedures come from Mesopotamia. There are long lists of omens and also minutes of oracles put to the sheep liver, so to say. And we also have evidence like that in not only from this one fragment, but from many more texts from Hittite Anatolia. And from these texts, the hermeneutics, the technique of interpretation of what you can see on the liver is rather well understood, and it is certain signs that are interpreted as unfavorable or favorable. And the basic rule is that anything that is an anomaly, anything that is not the normal healthy liver of a sheep, any anomaly indicates something unfavorable. And especially darkness in any part is an unfavorable sign. And these various signs on the liver were then accumulated over one extispicy and counted out, and then you get a final result. And the individual hypothesis, the individual result, Nergal will devour my army or something like that, for the overall interpretation, it is only important that this is negative. The actual wording, what it is not important anymore in this overall interpretation procedure. So we do understand the logic of this interpretation procedures to a good extent, but it is not possible to make a direct connection between a specific disease, let's say of the sheep, and what you find as the description of a negative event in an individual omen entry that is used.
Okay, I think there are several kind of other questions related to sheep litter now, but I think I will choose one here from an anonymous kind of participant to Andreas. Like, what kind of goods were stored in 160 pittoi found in the royal storehouse of the Assyrian colony period?
Yeah, the problem is that when we excavated these pittoi, they were all empty. We did a lot of sieving of the earth we got from there, and in more than 90% there was nothing in it. So that was very frustrating for those who did the sieving work. So this brings into my mind, or in our mind, that they were filled with liquids, probably oil, because, or at least some of them were filled with oil, because when we restored them, it became obvious that with several pittoi, on the inner side of several pittoi, there is a dark coloring up to a certain level. So this turned out to be, this dark colorings turned out to be due to the fire. So it must be a liquid which burned, and oil would be one of those possible candidates for that. Or grain. So in some there were stored grain, and from to add this from ethnographic analogies from the early modern Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, we know that virtually everything could be stored in such devices.
There is another question here, might be also from Mesut Ilgin. Are there any statues similar to those of Greek and Roman antique cities in Anatolia or in the find spectrum?
No. The statues of the Hellenistic and Roman period in Anatolia are spectacular. Hittite art is in general, or in the majority, much smaller, often made of pottery. We have large vases, and they can be decorated with relief. But we do not know anything about freestanding statues like we know from the Hellenistic and Greek period. So in the Bronze Age, there is a totally different approach.
Okay, thank you very much. I just check if we have what kind of other questions we've got. Might be it's one of the interesting kind of, might be it's for both of Andreas and Daniel. So together, I think if you were to give a rough number, how many written texts of Boğazköy Hattuša excavated before 2012 are unpublished and waiting publication?
That Daniel can easily answer.
Yeah, all the fragments that were found, well, but possibly we have overseen something, but basically all the fragments found in the course of the excavations of the German Archaeological Institute from 1931 to 2020 for a few weeks now have been published. All the texts, most of, I think there may be a few that are still unpublished in the Berlin Museum, but most of them have, the vast majority of them have been published. There is a rather sizable group of fragments from the very early excavations, the famous bow texts, which were returned from Berlin to the Ankara Museum 30 years ago. And of those, still, I think between 3,000 and 4,000 fragments have not been published. They have been used in research, but they haven't been published yet. But it is very encouraging that very recently colleagues like Urs Soysal Rukia Akdoğan, İlknur Taş, Metin Alparslan made very good progress in publishing these texts, and I really do hope that they will soon be available to everyone like the other 25,000 texts.
Great, thank you very much. And I would say this, we close this session for today. And I thank all three lecturers for their presentation and their patience in answering all the questions by the participants of this webinar. And I would like to announce that we have our next lecture on building in Byzantium by Alcibiades Ginales and colleagues in 2 weeks' time here at the same place. And we're looking forward to see you all back, and have a nice evening. Görüşürüz, iyi akşamlar, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you
Goodbye.
for
Thank you.
visiting.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.